What is up, everybody? This is Dylan from the Real MMA Podcast. We're going to get started in just one moment. This episode, we're going to be doing a recap of this last weekend of the UFC Fight Night Chile between Demian Maia and Kamaru Usman. We'll also be doing a look ahead of this week's UFC Liverpool between Stephen Thompson and Darren Till. So we'll give everybody just a few more moments to join, and then we'll go ahead and get right into it. Alright guys, let's get into it. So, with a recap of last weekend was Fight Night Chile, and it was headlined by Kamaru Usman and Demian Maia. So just getting right into that, I'm going to go through some few stats, and hey, what's up Jacob? Thanks for joining, man. We're going to go through a few stats here, and my personal picks for fights of that night. So the total attendance for the fight was going to be 11,082 people. That one actually sold out. It was a pretty good event. Chilean fans, they really showed out for the fighters, and even though they were not top tier names, they still got a ton of respect, and the fights ended up really well. I'm going to give the fight of the night that night to Suarez versus Grasso. The stats for that night were total knockdowns 0 for both fighters, total strikes 4 for Suarez, significant strikes 2 for Suarez, takedowns 2 for Suarez, and sub attempts 1 for Suarez. Winner of that fight ended up going to Suarez as well by submission, rear naked choke, first round with 2 minutes and 15 seconds into that round. And for a knockout of the fight, knockout of the night, I'm going to go ahead and give that to the Devastator Reyes versus the Killer Gorilla. He knocked him out in the first round with 2 minutes and 6 seconds into the first round. It was a really good fight. The Reyes Killer Gorilla, believe it or not, I know the KO doesn't really say it, but the KO was nasty. Killer Gorilla tried to give him a good few punches. He got a couple significant strikes in, but Reyes was able to put him out. We're going to go ahead and do a recap of the main event as well. Demian Maia versus Kamaru Usman. That was the winner for that fight was Kamaru Usman by decision. If you looked at the stats, though, you probably wouldn't be able to tell based on the stats. Knockdowns 1 for Usman, total strikes 97, significant strikes 66, takedown 0, and submission attempt 0. A fun fact on that fight as well, Demian Maia with a total attempt of 16 takedowns, all shot down and failed. 27 significant strikes, 33 total strikes, 0 submissions, and 0 knockdowns. My opinions of the total event altogether, really good fights. There were 3 knockouts, I think, total in the entire event, and then there were 2 knockouts, I believe. The last fight, it was pretty stale. The two fighters were very unevenly matched up. Kamaru Usman, more of a striker, more of a boxer and brawler. Demian Maia, he was more of a submitter. You could definitely tell in the match, Maia wanted to lay on his back. He wanted Usman to come to the ground to fight him. Usman wasn't having anything of it. He was standing, and ref had to separate them a few times to get him to stand up. And that is to be expected with those kind of fights. Kamaru Usman definitely was the decisive winner in that. He had more strikes on the feet. He was able to chase Maia down most of the match. But it was a pretty boring fight if you're a non-technical UFC fan. If you're going to watch the event for a knockout or for a crazy choke, not the fight to see. But we'll go ahead and move on to this weekend's event, which is going to be UFC Fight Night in Liverpool, UK. That's going to be a headline between Stephen Thompson and Darren Till. May the 27th at 12 o'clock noon. It's a weird time for that one where it is going to be in the UK. They want their fans to have the chance to be able to watch it here in America. So they're going to go ahead and schedule that one for 12 o'clock noon. A stylistic breakdown of the two fighters. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson has a total record of 14-2-1, a height of 72 inches, a weight of 170 pounds, and is based out of the country USA. And he is currently ranked the number one contender in that weight class. His last fight was against Jorge Masvidal, and it was a win by decision. And Stephen Thompson, if you haven't had the chance to check him out, he's a very, very, very good fighter. His two losses came to the same person, which is the current champion, Tyron Woodley, and were by decision on both, I believe. And he also has a weird karate style where he fights from a sideways position and likes to do the spinning heel kicks and spinning kicks to the face. He'll be taking on, as I mentioned, Darren the Gorilla Till, who has a total record of 16-0-1, a height of 72 inches, a weight of 170 pounds, and is based out of the UK. His last fight was against Donald the Cowboy Cerrone, and he won that fight by TKO, with 4 minutes and 20 seconds into the first round. So my total prediction for that fight, I'm going to give it to Thompson. Thompson, he's, like I mentioned, he's got a weird fighting style. It's a karate base, so he's going to come at Darren Till with something he hasn't seen. Darren Till is relatively still young for the company, and I can definitely tell the UFC is trying to boost his likes up from the fans, especially since it is in Liverpool, England, which is his hometown. It's kind of disrespectful to Thompson since he is the number one contender, but Thompson doesn't seem too bummed out about it. He's excited for the challenge. And with that being said, we're going to move on into my new segment. Listen, we need to talk. So this week there was reports of the ESPN being bought out of, or ESPN rather, buying out UFC Fight Pass. With this, Walt Disney and Fox are teaming up on a joint bid for rights to the UFC fights. These fights will be broadcasted on ESPN's new app, ESPN Plus, and the service would get as many as 15 events if the two companies can split the charge. The UFC package with ESPN would be for them to pay $120 million to $180 million a year, and Fox currently owns the rights until December of this year. Fox currently pays $120 million, but if this deal goes through and falls out how it's supposed to, they will end up paying over $200 million a year to retain its part of the UFC Fight Night. The UFC owner, Endeavor, has reportedly looked for $300 to $400 million a year. Obviously, splitting those two companies up, it would fall out how we mentioned it before. And along with that, ESPN is also gaining Ariel Helwani and Chael Sonnen. Ariel Helwani, formerly of MMA Hour, and Chael Sonnen is from his own podcast, but is partnered with the Bellator company. These two would get a 30-minute weekly show on Wednesdays, and the show will be shown on ESPN Plus as well, the new app, and will premiere on June the 20th. So my current thoughts on that, and listen, we need to talk about it. My current thoughts on that is, for people that are, like I mentioned, non-hardcore UFC fans, this is almost like a spit in the face to us. Because when we started, ESPN always looked at the UFC as sort of like the redheaded stepchild that it never wanted. And actually, if you remember in the very beginning of the UFC, they would poke fun at people like Joe Rogan and other people who were big supporters of the UFC, and say, you know, is this really a sport, or do you guys really deserve the spotlight of a channel like ESPN? And now we're sort of buying into what we didn't never want to become as a company or as fans. And there's no hate on ESPN, don't get me wrong, I love ESPN, but when you watch ESPN, it is more of like a uniformed type, suit and tie type of don't do any kind of wrong, don't say anything wrong. And if you know anything about the UFC or the Bellator company or Pride FC, Strikeforce, it was that we were able to see our fighters be authentic and be real. And they were able to actually speak their mind and tell what they thought of their company, which is what made the company so beautiful. So my question to you, and you can leave that in the comments, your opinions, is how do you feel about this merger? Are you happy that you're going to be able to see UFC fights now on ESPN, or are you leery that we may be being lured into something that we might not want? Also, with that being said, the second topic that I want to talk about is the oversaturation of the sport. And listen, we need to talk. The sport is getting oversaturated. I want to appreciate and not hate here, but for every UFC event that comes on, I feel like I see 20 fans hate on the fact that the main event isn't going to be a super fight. And we just have to come to realize that super fights are not going to happen at every single UFC event. Instead, you need to appreciate the fact that these fighters are putting their life on the line and that they go out there with their own technical styles, and appreciate some of the moves and some of the different ways that they win, instead of, always hating and saying, we don't get Conor McGregor every UFC event. We don't get a Nate Diaz every single UFC event. And in my own opinion, I feel like they should go to a 6 pay-per-view format where there's 6 major pay-per-views a year. And every pay-per-view, I'd like to see all super fights. And that way we get a Super Bowl type event 6 times a year in intervals. And it gives us a little bit of what more to look forward to for the next pay-per-view. Also, though, I feel like they should utilize the UFC Fight Nights to be a tournament for the contenders that are trying to go to the pay-per-views and fight the super fights. And for the UFC Fight Pass that's newly acquired from ESPN, they should be featuring newbies or like the rookies into the UFC and building their careers up. What this will do for us is it will give us fighters that will last the test of time. We'll be able to see more of our favorite fighters instead of seeing less, because if we continue on this path of super fights every UFC event, we're going to see our favorite fighters being worn down by the test of time and by the fighting that they're putting onto their bodies, which is very taxing. So if we seen less pay-per-views and more time gaps in between, we would be able to appreciate our favorite fighters over more of a span of time. Tell me your opinions down in the comments on what you think about that. I know the super fight is the big pull for most fans that are not conventional UFC fans, and I know the fighters, they want that big money. They want that red panty money, as Conor McGregor says. But at what cost does that cost us? Do you want to see a fighter fight for 5, 6, 7, 8 years? Or are you just looking for the couple super fights and you're ready to go ahead and discard them for the next big thing? With that being said, I'd like to transition on into the big stories and news from this weekend and into today that crossed over that we may have missed. Excuse me. And firstly, I'll start with Bellator news. Whereas Mirko Cro Cop is officially out of Bellator 200's main event for an undisclosed injury. With this going down, what's going to happen from here is middleweight championship bout between Rafael Carvalho and challenger Gegard Mousasi, and I probably mispronounced that and I apologize, is expected to serve as the main event now. That's a big blow for Bellator 200. Bellator is really catching on. They're really catching up to the UFC, and I'm excited to see what comes out of that. We got to enjoy Fedor and Frank Mir fight at the last Bellator event, and this Bellator 200 was slated to be a pretty good one between Mirko Cro Cop and Roy Country Boy Nelson. Unfortunately, we'll have to wait a little bit longer for that. In other news, this was UFC news. Kamaru Usman, after UFC Fight Night, called out Tyrone Woodley for the championship belt or the winner of the Thompson-Till fight, with Thompson currently being ranked the number one contender, as I mentioned prior. The reason this is notable is that Kamaru Usman prior to the event was calling out his rival Colby Covington. However, this is almost it seems like an attempt to discredit the interim fight, so that the interim championship belt that Colby Covington is going to fight Rafael dos Anjos doesn't seem as important, and will pull fans more to see Kamaru Usman versus Tyron Woodley. I think it's a good way to trick fans into thinking that's what we should see. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the interim belt. I think that we're sort of trying to get too many belts involved, and we should just fall back to the original plan of having just a champ in every class. And also, we should make our fighters fight the fights that they're being scheduled for. We have too many fighters now where they are set on these contracts for 2 years where they get paid out, like a Nick Diaz or a Nate Diaz. And the UFC, I feel like is getting screwed in the long haul here. They're going to be paying fighters out to fight regardless. They're not gonna. I mean, they can decide to fight or they can decide not to fight, but they're still gonna have to pay these fighters, which seems kind of counterintuitive to my own opinion. So what I'm thinking is, make it a loophole in their contract. If you don't want to fight this fight, that's okay, but you don't get paid for this entire span of time, which will thus turn fighters into more likely to fight these fights that they don't want to pull out, such as like a Yair Rodriguez versus Zabit, who if you've been paying attention to the UFC, Yair Rodriguez was offered the Zabit fight and declined that twice, and then afterwards the UFC had to release him because he wasn't basically given what they were trying to pay. I mean, you wouldn't want to go to a McDonald's and order 2 chicken sandwiches and then only get one because the McDonald's person only wants to give you half of what you paid for. Lastly, in the news world, in a strange move, the UFC has decided to drop Overeem versus Blades to the prelims and upgrade Holly Holm versus Megan Anderson to the main card for UFC 225. This is being followed by a different reaction from the fighters in the MMA world. Don't get me wrong, Holly Holm is a very good fighter. She was the person that took down Ronda Rousey and basically turned her career around. But she's been on a few fight loss, and Overeem and Blades is the pull. They're 2 big heavyweights. You're going to see a major knockout. So if you're the UFC and you want an easy fight to pull in money, then Overeem and Blades is the obvious choice. Holly Holmes versus unknown Megan Anderson is only going to pull a select part of our crowd, and in doing so, you're going to lose more people. And they were already set to fight for the prelim. So for the prelim fight, you want people to check out that UFC prelim on FS1. That's what gets people prepped up for the main card. So I'd like to get you guys' opinion on all the things that are covered in the news here. And if you want to drop that down in the comments, I would greatly appreciate it. So guys, that's going to be it for today. We'll be back on Friday, May the 25th to do a full preview of this weekend's fights. We're going to do a stylistic breakdown for every single fight instead of just the main event that I covered today. In there, we're going to also do some different highlights of the fighters and what we can expect. If you'd like to join us for that full breakdown of UFC Fight Night Liverpool, then check out my page and just be on the lookout. We'll be sending more updates through the week. If you guys don't mind liking and sharing this page, I greatly appreciate you. And if you'd also go and like my friends over at Game Time Sports Network and give their page a like and a share. There are some awesome guys. They cover all types of sports. They cover football, baseball, basketball. And they do, I know for their last episode, I believe they did the Houston Texans. So they do some teams that we here in Tennessee, or if you're watching from all over the country, you'd probably know or you'd see on a Sunday. Also, I'd like to mention on this podcast that I'm doing a challenge for you guys. That if I can get 100 followers and 100 likes, then I will do the one chip challenge on live stream here on Facebook Live after one of the events. So you guys will get to see that and enjoy my pain there for just a simple like and follow on the page. What should I do for 1,000? leave your responses in the comments here, and I'll consider doing that on live stream. And I'm not above doing something pretty crazy and wild, as long as it doesn't involve anything illegal or anything that's going to send me to the hospital or kill me. But guys, thank you all for joining, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. All right, bye.